afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Miriam Dlela, and I'm here to present Managing Conflict in the Workplace. I'm representing ADCO this afternoon. We're looking at conflict management, and this is one of the CPD subjects, if we must call it that. And I'm looking forward to spending the afternoon with you. If there are any questions, we'll have them at the end. You do have your workbook with you, which you can follow the workshop. And yeah, let's go for it. So the agenda for this afternoon is looking at the, obviously I've welcomed you already, purpose and outcomes of this session, looking at the conflict and the common sources of conflict, strategies to mitigate the risk of conflict, practical steps for handling challenging conversations, and then looking at attributes of a good leader when handling conflict, assessing your conflict handling skills, and then we summarize and close in the end. Right, let's start by looking at the purpose and outcomes of conflict. For us to be able to handle conflict, we need to know where the conflict is coming from. So finding your main sources of conflict will enable us to actually apply techniques and tactics for managing conflict, to strategize and mitigate the risk of conflict, handling a challenging conversation, looking at the attributes, obviously, of a good leader in a conflict situation, mediate a conflict situation within your own team, and apply strategies to reduce conflict across departments. In the world that we live in, it's not easy to work together. There's always competition, very little or no collaboration, and things seem to be very tough. Even in the wild, it so happens. But the question we need to ask is, do we need conflict? There's actually a reason why we need conflict. Believe it or not, conflict can be a positive thing in our lives. Research has shown that the most creative and productive teams are the most diverse teams. So it is important to have an open space in the organization for conflict. Without conflict, we'll not be able to have major personal changes or social progress. Looking at, for instance, in the personal change, you are in buying and selling business. The conflict that comes in there is, should we buy, should we not? Should we negotiate, should we not? In the social environment, we're looking at our own country, South Africa, 1994. That obviously was conflict with positive outcome, as well as the Berlin Wall that fell in 1989. So what is conflict? Conflict is a process that begins when one party perceives another party has negatively affected or is about to negatively affect something the other party cares about. That is, a difference of opinion, values, and points of view. I can imagine in estate agencies, I'm sure there are a lot of different opinions, points of view that differ, and somehow you have to juggle that in order to have a positive outcome. So clearly positive is not such a bad thing, but it can get to be bring negative outcome. Let's look at what causes conflict. Change can cause conflict. Interpersonal relationships, where different people living in the same environment, chances are we do not think the same, we think differently, and conflict can really come out of interpersonal relationships, okay? External changes in your environment, we're looking at the economy, how it affects the estate agency industry. Legislation as well. For instance, the credit amnesty bill that has been introduced, that could bring conflict in some way, one way or another. Poor communication. You pass on a message, it's not communicated properly, there's bound to be conflict there. A subpar performance from a colleague. One colleague feels that, I'm doing my work, you're not doing your work. It happens. Harassment, limited resources, and pressure. These are all sources of conflict. Once we're aware of the causes of conflict, we need to find strategies to mitigate that conflict or those conflicts. Firstly, we need to know what to look out for. Okay, finding the signs that actually speak of possible conflict. And at this point, it's very important to do this so you're able to actually deal with the conflict properly. So as a principal, you're able to anticipate conflict when there are certain differences or changes in the environment. Sometimes there's conscious but unexpressed differences. Awareness of specific areas of difference and problematic issues. Focus still on common goals, less on differences, is how you would actually go around that conflict. Having a discussion, conflict addressed openly and parties are made aware of issues, people still productive but focus on shifting. Different types of conflict happen in different ways. You can have an open dispute, okay? Arguments, both parties conscious of issues and differences, group losing sight of common goals, lower productivity, strained relationships, more pressure. There can be open conflict, where there's heated words and debate, no backing down, resolution not top priority, differences very, very evident, communication guarded and not open. There can be great division in the team or across teams, across departments. Then resolved issues, separation and division, people taking sides, allied groups forming, or we call them cliques, for negativity, hostility, resentment, and tension. So now, once you've identified there's conflict and there's a need to actually mitigate or deal with the conflict, let's look at the 6-step process in handling conflict. It's very important to acknowledge that there's conflict. You need to identify the real cause. What exactly is the real issue? This helps with dealing with issues without the emotions around that. So you're being objective, professional, and unemotional. If you do not diffuse the emotions in any conflict, it's very difficult to bring the people down to a point where they can actually discuss productively to come up with an amicable solution. You need to listen actively as a principal or a mediator to all points of views. What are the views from the different parties, and also what is your view about the whole issue? Together you need to explore and generate ways of resolving the conflict. How can it all be solved? Select a solution and clarify responsibilities. Who will do what and when? Then in the end, you need to schedule a follow-up. When can we meet to check up on the progress? It's very important as well during this process that you seek to ask questions to understand the situation rather than telling the people what to do. Sometimes you're called to mediate in cross teams. The first thing that you need to do is determine if you're the best person to assist with the conflict, because sometimes probably you're not the best person to resolve the issue. You avoid being the judge and the jury, and you allow both parties a chance to voice their opinions openly without interruption. You need to summarize what each one has said. You need to confirm, to check understanding and satisfaction, the accuracy of what you have summarized by asking questions. Then, in the end, you need to establish the points of agreement. You need to clarify the points of difference, create a shared vision, ask both parties what their ideal situation would be. You need to generate a possible solution by asking both parties for input and making mutually beneficial suggestions. Here we're obviously looking at a solution and the best way to get buy-in. You need to reach an agreement to implement and assess the situation, or the solution, sorry. Allow people to take shared responsibilities for the solution. A very good skill to use when appropriate is empathy. Steve Covey defines empathy as the psychological equivalent of A is to feel understood. Empathy is the power of imaginatively experiencing another's experience. So you can see a high heel there. Assuming that you don't know what the next person is going through, put yourself in their shoes and see where they're coming from. By doing this, we're able to build a bridge for two-way communication. You need to listen for feelings, you need to focus on solutions, and you need to address feelings first before you look at the facts. As previously mentioned, if you don't diffuse the emotions, the feelings of the people right there and then, it will be very difficult to get them to a point where they want to work together to come to an amicable solution. Right now I'm going to show you a video of two women in the working place and how empathy is demonstrated practically.
You know, every time you're late, I have to pick up your slack.
I'm sorry, I've got a lot going on right now. Anyway, it was 10 minutes. Is it really that big of a deal?
It was 20 minutes, and yes, it is a big deal. How about I start leaving 20 minutes early, and you can see what it's like to have 20 minutes worth of extra work to do.
I said I was sorry. What more do you want from me?
How about a real apology for one thing, and maybe then you can start coming in on time.
How about you stop making such a big deal out of one little mistake?
Wow, you are so not gonna last here. Thank you. You know, every time you're late, I have to pick up your slack.
My mornings have been really tough with the kids lately. I'm sorry that's affected you.
Well, you're gonna have to get that figured out because that was just 20 minutes of covering both phones.
I really am sorry. I've been there before and I know what a drag it is.
Yeah, it's really stressful.
I promise I'll be on time from now on.
I'd appreciate that.
In the second scenario, that is empathy in practice, where the lady has managed to actually diffuse the emotions of her colleague well enough for her to understood where she's coming from and realizing that they can actually come up with a good solution together. What does empathy do for us? Empathy gets emotional content out of the way and allows us to proceed with business. When the other person feels heard and understood, more chance of working towards a solution is possible. It demonstrates that we're human. It keeps us from sounding defensive and reduces the possibility of an argument. It also can turn a negative situation into a positive. Let's look at the steps for handling challenging conversations. This step is very, very critical in Okay. Let's look at the steps for handling challenging conversations. It is critical to describe what you want to talk about and why, to acknowledge the person. Because by doing this, you're not judging and you're not looking at the personal side of things. Rather, you're trying to focus on the issue at hand. Next step is to gather further information to assess the situation, check understanding, and together explore alternatives to sort out the conflict. Agree on a plan of action and who will be accountable for what. Set a follow-up date to review progress. Never ever assume that it is going to sort itself out. This also shows that you're committed to the solution. In every difficult situation is potential value. Believe this, then begin looking for it. So instead of seeing people as complicated and problematic, see the potential of bringing creativity and differentiation in the workplace. Now that we've set some background around conflict management, we now need to look at how you as a leader and your attributes can help you in conflict management. The attributes of a good leader. Number one, leaders need to address conflict when it arises. That's given. There's no airy-fairy, things don't happen, everything is cool. Conflict will always arise, and as good leaders, you need to be able to address those. Conflict differs from situation to situation, from person to person, from team to team, and cross-functionally. How do we understand our conflict styles and the styles of others? A useful tool to use is the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, TKI. TKI assesses our typical behavior in conflict situations. Shortly, you'll be able to give yourself feedback by assessing your different style or your different styles or your way of dealing with conflict. But how is the TKI actually used? The TKI describes our behavior when addressing a conflict situation in 2 dimensions. You being assertive and cooperative. TKI helps leaders to understand how interpersonal group dynamics are affected by conflict handling styles. It also helps us make informed decisions about choosing an appropriate style when approaching a conflict situation. The 5 conflict handling styles. The first one is competing. Competing, you satisfy your own concerns at the expense of others. It's not all bad, necessary at times. It's based on the situation. If only manage conflict through competition, you're ineffectively managing situations and people. Collaborating, finding a solution to conflict that is a win-win solution. It takes a lot of time, energy, and resources, often used in high-risk situations, and can mean compromise or just work together. Compromising, solution is only partially satisfies one person or each party. No winners, no losers. If you only use this style, the team starts to game the system and ask for more than they truly need. Avoiding is the other conflict style. Nothing is resolved. It's almost like a band-aid of an oozing wound. Eventually you have to deal with the conflict. Accommodating, sacrificing your own needs and desires for others. You lose, they win. It can be seen as a doormat. Only wimps accommodate. I have a business to run. That's actually untrue. Accommodation is the best tool to use when you're not the subject matter expert or when the outcome is not that important to you. So, which styles to use when? Competing. When you use this style is in an emergency that requires quick and decisive action, when unpopular steps are necessary, enforcing rules, disciplining a team member, or cutting costs. Company or a deal is on the line and you know what it takes to get it back on track. When not to use competing, if the outcome doesn't really matter to you and there is no reason to compete, when you're not the subject matter expert, when angry and just want to prove a point, especially if surrounded by yes people. Accommodating. You use this when you're preserving harmony in most important aspect of the conflict situation. The issue at hand is much more important to the other person. You realize you're wrong. This shows you're reasonable. You want to build social credits for future use. Team development is your goal. Let your team experiment and learn from their mistakes. When not to use it. When safety and security are paramount to resolving the conflict, the outcome is vital for the organization's success. Avoiding. When to use avoidance, emotions are high and people need to calm down. The team is fully capable of resolving the issue without your input. More information needs to be gathered first. The issue is actually a result of a much simpler issue that can be solved more easily. When not to use this, when decision needs to be made quickly, the core reason is to avoid a frank conversation. Collaborating. When to use this, your objective is to learn from the conflict, a good way to explore others' views. There are hard feelings between members of the conflict that need to be resolved to improve the organization or the team as a whole. The concerns of both parties are too important to be compromised. When not to use, a quick decision is imperative to the situation. Resources are tight and the conflict is trivial, that it doesn't need that much time. Compromising. Okay, when to use it? Asserting your goals is not worth the effort. The opposing members of the conflict are of equal power standing. Realization that the situation is complicated and needs more time to solve than is available. Temporary solution is needed. There is immense time pressure. When not to use it is when compromising undermines values of the principles of the organization. If an attitude of gaming is noticed, deflecting attention from actual issue. So now, in your workbooks on page 18, there's, as I spoke before, of your ability to assess yourself and give yourself feedback in terms of what kind of style you actually use in which situation. You need to look at what is your preferred conflict handling style, okay? Are you aware enough during conflict to choose the most appropriate or helpful style? To find out your primary conflict handling intention. Indicate how often you rely on each of the following tactics by circling the number on the right that you feel is more appropriate. Then refer back to page 19 for scoring and interpretation. In summary, we need to remember that it is not personal, it's only anger talking. It's important to note that when people are angry, they're not coming from a position of strength, okay? You need to detach yourself and put yourself in their shoes. Remember the high heel. Never patronize or minimize the other party. Allow the person to vent, never interrupt. Read between the lines and try and see both sides of the story. Be careful of prescribing, pushing your ideas and solutions. It's so easy during conflict to actually try and assert yourself and your point of view, and you forget to actually listen and hear actively what the issue is actually about. Listen for feelings first and facts second. Remember, we said that if you do not diffuse the emotions in a situation, you'll not be able to get the two people or more the parties to actually come to an amicable solution. Ask appropriate questions and allow the person to make suggestions. Clarify the details and never assume. And lastly, treat all people as equals. Thank you very much. Remember, in order for you to earn CPD points, you need to complete the multiple choice questions. Thank you.